I'm Joanna Canyon, a senior program officer at the Walton Family Foundation's K-12 education team. At the start of the pandemic, I had the privilege of working with instruction partners to support the creation and distribution of their grab and go resources. These were instructional materials for kindergarten through ninth grade students to access while their physical schools were closed. And importantly, instruction partners' materials were both digital and analog. This helps students with connectivity issues be able to continue to learn. And joining me today is Instruction Partners CEO, Emily Freitag. So pleased to be here with you, Emily. Wanted to start off with a question, just helping folks understand sort of where you were pre-pandemic and how that shifted at the start of COVID. Pre-pandemic, Instruction Partners was working with 200 schools across 11 states to implement high-quality curriculum and align professional learning. When COVID-19 began shutting schools down, what were you seeing from communities and families that informed your approach to what ultimately would be the grab-and-go resources?
Sure. So glad to be with you. And thank you again for the support that made this all possible. Before COVID-19, Instruction Partners was primarily traveling to schools, observing classrooms, conducting professional learning and coaching for teachers and for leaders. And when COVID really shut schools down, we had started preparing resources and sharing with our partners, here's some things that you can do. We really kicked into gear to try to stay as close to our partners as we could to understand the challenges they were facing. And that took a lot of forms, but mostly it looked like spending a lot of time with people on Zoom. And in a number of school districts, we ended up almost serving as a kind of chief of staff, taking notes in their leadership team meetings, trying to synthesize their next steps, trying to be there as a thought partner as they thought about their options, which gave us a really helpful understanding of the kinds of questions leaders were really facing. And it was clear that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the focus was not on instruction. It was on making sure nutrition needs were covered, making sure that devices were just even getting out to kids where possible. And the amount of sort of mind share that people had to think about what kids were going to be doing during their learning time, whether that was work packet learning time or on Zoom, was just a challenge. And so we knew that time was of the essence. We only had, 6 weeks left in the school year in some schools. And we are not curriculum developers, nor do we aspire to be. But we just saw this repeated need across so many of our partners for something that they could just use, something that sort of took some of the cognitive lift out of the equation. And in particular, we really saw a need for kids who didn't have devices or didn't have Wi-Fi. And with a kind of universal design principle, we wanted to think first about the kids who had the greatest needs. And that's what led us to make the grab and go instructional materials in a way that would really work in that paper-based, asynchronous kind of way. So that's where it came from.
And just tell us a bit more about these materials, just because I know what you did there was quite incredible. How are students and families and schools using them to keep instruction going?
Sure. So the need that we saw was for materials that could be used immediately in order to support learning in math, in reading, and in science. And so we designed them around a certain number of hours of instruction per day. And these were curated from existing open source materials. So the piece of service that we could offer in that was that active curation to really say, okay, what are the standards that in most school systems people are still left with across the balance of this year? What are the materials that are out there that could be used to support that? how do we pull that into one place? We created a student-facing version as well as a teacher-facing version, as well as a parent-facing version, because parents were supporting so much. And it was basically taking the work of creating the work packets off of the shoulders of the leaders who were trying to navigate so many challenges at that time, so that if nothing else, they had something they could literally grab and go. And that was a term that was being used at the time to really talk about lunches, like grab and go lunches. Right. Nutrition departments were shifting from sort of in-person delivery to this, how do we make all of our food grab and go? So we thought, wouldn't it be great if schools had some kind of instructional materials that they could just use, if nothing else?
And, that's a big pivot for your organization. Previously you had been working sort of shoulder to shoulder with educators, and now you're sort of in this position of filling a very time-sensitive need of creating educational content. And as you noted, you're not necessarily a traditional curriculum developer. So, how did this experience feel to the organization? How did it change or strengthen instruction partners' approach going forward?
Yeah, if you say grab and go to instruction partners, staff members that were really involved, they still have a huge range of emotions. I think it was very hard. And it also felt like something we could do to be of service. And in those early weeks of the pandemic, there was a part of that felt really good. And I think the team was really proud of how much use they ended up getting. We had, thousands and thousands of downloads, and schools telling us, gosh, thank you so much for this. It's exactly what we need. So there was something that felt good about it. We had to totally reorganize our staff into grade level teams. We have a number of content coaches who mostly were observing classrooms and working with teachers and leaders, but they had a real range of expertise. So we certainly had people who had done a lot of this kind of curriculum development. And if they had been in a district, that would have been what they were asked to do. And so, we reorganized. I think we reorganized again a couple of weeks later as we got a sense of sort of who was really excelling at certain components of it. So it was a lot of change. It was a lot of change on a short time period. And it felt like a sprint every week, because we've said, okay, we're going to do this. You'll remember I called you and I said, we're thinking about this. We see this as a need. We'd love support to do it. Because it did mean that we weren't going to be spending time on a lot of other things. And we said, okay, we're going to do this, but we didn't have it done before we said that. So we were racing the clock every week to get the materials up and out, knowing that a lot of people were waiting on them to hit download and print.
Yeah. And my last question is just, in terms of the foundation support, what did it enable your organization to do?
Yeah, it enabled us to focus on doing that, on really giving people the time and space to really say, okay, we're going to put these materials together, and we think they're going to help our partners, but also help many schools beyond that. But without a revenue source for that work, we wouldn't have been able to create that kind of focus and attention. So it enabled that focus. It also was just such a boost in the arm for us at that time to feel like we could be of help, and that other people wanted to support us in being of help in that kind of activity. Because like every organization, we were in a moment of trying to say, okay, what is our reality in this time?
Thank you, Emily. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.